The alien academy was unlike anything on Earth. Enormous halls carved into black stone glowing with faint blue lines that pulsed like veins. The air was thick with the hum of machines, and the faint metallic scent of alien alloys. Rows of young cadets filled the classroom, their bodies tall, slender, armored in shades of silver and green, their eyes glowing faintly under the low light. They were not children, but not yet warriors. Each one carried themselves with pride, trained from birth to believe they were the strongest species in the galaxy. At the far end of the room the instructor stood, his skin dark gray, his ridged face sharp, his voice carrying through the chamber like the strike of iron. He had trained hundreds of warriors, breaking the weak and sharpening the strong. He despised failure, he despised weakness, and above all he despised humans. When he looked across the classroom his gaze landed on the lone human sitting near the corner. The human was small compared to the others, wearing only the academy's simple uniform, his face calm, his eyes studying the room not with fear but with something else, something the instructor could not name. It unsettled him, though he would never admit it aloud. The instructor's voice cut through the silence. Cadets, today we will test weapon improvisation. It is a measure of intelligence, instinct and strength. You will show me how your species creates tools of war. He let his eyes linger on the human, then pointed a clawed finger directly at him. You human, you will begin. The classroom shifted. Every alien cadet turned their glowing eyes toward the human. Some smirked, some hissed softly, others whispered in their own tongue, mocking the idea that a creature from a so-called deathworld could impress them. Everyone knew humans were fragile, soft-skinned, weak and backward. Their worlds were dangerous, yes, but it was luck, not strength, that kept them alive. At least that was what they told themselves. The human rose slowly, pushing the chair back without a sound. He stood in the center of the room, all eyes following him. He did not ask questions, he did not argue. Instead he looked around, scanning the classroom. His hands rested briefly on the desk, then on the frame of the chair. He crouched, studying the base of the furniture as if calculating angles and weight. The instructor folded his arms. Show us, then human, show us the power of your kind. His tone carried mockery, his eyes already filled with the anticipation of failure. He wanted this human broken, humiliated before the others so they would never forget their place. The human nodded once, calm, steady, his voice quiet but clear. Very well. He dragged the chair closer, his fingers running over the wood-like frame. Then he snapped a piece from the leg. The sound of the break echoed across the room. Aliens leaned forward, expecting him to look clumsy, weak, but instead his movements were quick, deliberate, precise. His hands worked with the calm of someone who had done this before. He stripped wiring from the panel near the wall, tied it tight, stretched it across the bent frame, and began to shape something unfamiliar to the aliens but deeply familiar to him. The instructor frowned, his brow furrowed. What are you making? The human did not answer, his focus absolute. He bent the frame further, testing its tension, pulling the wire, adjusting its hold. The aliens began to whisper, confused. One muttered, it looks like nothing, it looks broken. Another chuckled, maybe he is building a toy. Minutes passed and the whispers grew louder until suddenly the human lifted the frame in his hands. The object now bent into a smooth curve, the wire pulled tight between its ends. He had built a bow, primitive, ancient, but undeniably a weapon. The aliens stopped laughing. The instructor narrowed his eyes. You think to mock us with that primitive stick? The human still said nothing. He bent down, collected a narrow shard of metal from the floor, filed its edge against the desk with quick scraping motions until it formed a sharp point, then attached it to another strip of wood. In moments he held an arrow, crude but deadly. The silence in the room grew heavier. The aliens stared, some with confusion, others with something sharper, unease. The instructor waved a claw toward the practice dummy at the far wall. Very well, human, show us your toy. The human raised the bow, his movements smooth, almost ritual. His arm pulled the string back, the arrow narked perfectly, his shoulders steady, his breath controlled. The alien cadets leaned forward, waiting for the failure, for the wire to snap, for the arrow to drop weak and useless. The bowstring released with a sharp sound. The arrow sliced the air like lightning. It struck the dummy's chest with a heavy thud, piercing deep enough that the tip tore through the back. The dummy shuddered from the force, then stilled. The room was frozen. The human lowered the bow, expression calm as if this were nothing new. The cadets were silent, their glowing eyes wide. One whispered, impossible. Another muttered, but it is only wood and wire, how? The instructor's jaw tightened, his claws flexed. He would not show fear, he would not show shock, but deep in his chest something twisted. It was not supposed to be like this. The human was supposed to fail, supposed to be humiliated, not to stand calm and deadly with a weapon made from scraps. Again the instructor demanded, louder, strike again, prove it was not chance. The human obeyed with no hesitation. He bent another shard into shape, narked it, drew back the bow, and fired. The second arrow cut the air sharper, faster. It struck the dummy's head, snapping it back with a crack before embedding deep into the wall behind. A low hiss spread through the cadets. It was not laughter this time, it was instinct, the sound of unease, the sound a prey creature makes when the predator moves too close. The instructor's mouth opened, but no words came. For a moment he felt something he had not felt in decades, not anger, not shame, but fear. The human lowered the bow and waited quietly, as if expecting the next order. The instructor forced his voice to steady again. Enough, you have shown your method. His words faltered for a moment before returning to sharpness. Sit down. But the human did not sit. He looked calmly at the rows of cadets, his eyes steady, his voice quiet. And even we survived our world not because it was kind but because it was cruel. Everything there wants you dead, so you learn or you die, and when you learn you do not forget. The silence in the classroom thickened. The cadets shifted uneasily, their mocking smirks gone, replaced by something else, something heavier, respect laced with fear. The human set the bow gently against the desk, then returned to his seat, his face calm as if nothing had happened, but every alien in the room knew something had changed forever. The instructor clenched his claws behind his back, his face stiff, his mind racing. The human had not failed. The human had not bent to humiliation. Instead he had stood in the center of their academy and reminded them all of a truth they did not want to face. Humans were predators, even when unarmed, even when surrounded, even when mocked. They found a way to strike back. And in that quiet room filled with glowing alien eyes, the bow rested against the desk, waiting, patient, simple, deadly, a reminder that the lesson had only just begun. The training hall was still heavy with silence from the first test. The air felt different to the alien cadets, as if something invisible pressed down on their chests. They kept glancing at the crude bow leaning against the desk like a predator waiting to strike. Some shifted uncomfortably, their ridged shoulders twitching. Others refused to look at it at all, as though ignoring it might erase what they had seen. The instructor stood frozen, his grey face tight, his claws tapping against his own arm. The demonstration should have been a humiliation. It should have shown the weakness of humans. Instead it had become something else, something dangerous, and he could feel his cadets sensing it too, fear creeping into their disciplined minds. He would not allow it. No, this could not end like that. He straightened, and his voice came sharp, though there was a crack in its edge. Once could be chance. Even the weakest prey can get lucky. Now you will prove it again, human. You will strike until we know it is not luck. The cadets shifted, turning toward the lone human who still sat calmly at his desk. His expression did not change. No pride, no fear, no smugness, only quiet focus. He stood without a word, walked forward, and picked up the bow once more. His fingers brushed the wire as if testing the breath of a living creature. Then he bent to gather another shard of broken metal. The cadets leaned forward, some expecting the wire to snap, others desperate to see the failure that had not come before. Whispers filled the room in low tones, their languages harsh and fast. Can he do it again? Impossible. No one can shape accuracy from scraps. If he fails now, it proves nothing. The human worked silently, shaping the arrow, smoothing its surface with quick movements, his hands steady, practiced. His calmness unnerved the others. He did not rush, he did not falter. Every motion was precise, as if he had done it 1,000 times, though they knew such a weapon was ancient and forgotten in their modern world. The instructor pointed toward a set of moving targets near the wall, metal spheres that floated and darted, unpredictably glowing faint red. They were training drones built to test reflexes and speed, each one small, fast, and difficult to strike with. Even plasma pistols. Strike them, human, and show us your toy is more than luck. The cadets muttered softly, some grinning now at the thought. Surely the human would fail. A bow could never strike such fast machines. The test was unfair, but also final. There would be no recovery from failure here. The moment stretched tight as the human raised the bow, his eyes calm, his breath slow. He drew back the wire, the arrow held steady. The cadets held their own breaths. The instructor crossed his arms, his mouth tight. Then with a sudden twang the arrow was released. It sang through the air in a sharp hiss, and in the blink of an eye it struck the first drone dead center. Sparks exploded. The sphere dropped lifeless to the floor. Gasps filled the hall, the sound sharp and involuntary. The cadets could not stop themselves from hissing or muttering, their eyes wide, glowing brighter with shock. The instructor's jaw clenched tighter, but before he could speak the human had already bent down, shaping another arrow. The drones shifted their movements faster, more erratic, almost taunting the human. He ignored the distraction, his eyes following calmly. His bow pulled back, smooth fluid, and the second arrow flew with deadly speed. It cut the air like lightning, striking the second drone through its glowing core. It crashed to the ground, sparks scattering. The room fell into silence again. Only the sound of the drones buzzing filled the air. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, now their pride cracking, fear seeping through as the truth pressed down on them. This was no accident, no chance, this was skill. The instructor's throat felt dry, his voice forced louder. Continue. The drones moved faster, swerving high and low. The human crafted a third arrow from another scrap. His hands worked without hesitation. He knocked it, drew back, and released. The arrow screamed through the air, missing the drone by a fraction. The cadets hissed, some laughed nervously, but the arrow did not stop. It ricocheted off the wall, curved its path, and slammed into the drone from behind, knocking it down in sparks. The nervous laughter died instantly. No one moved, no one spoke. The instructor's claws dug into his arm so hard his grey skin threatened to split. He had wanted failure. Instead the human had turned it into a display of hunting skill, a display so primal it made even advanced warriors feel like prey. The human stood silent, his face calm. He lowered the bow once more. The classroom was suffocating under the weight of what they had just witnessed. One cadet whispered low, almost trembling, "He is no prey." Another answered, "No, he is predator." The words spread like smoke, filling every corner of the hall, though none dared to speak louder. Each alien now looked at the human not as weak, not as fragile, but as something dangerous, something ancient that their weapons and machines could not erase. The instructor snarled enough, his voice shaking with anger, though beneath it lay something else, something he could not name. He pointed a claw at the human. You have proven your skill, but skill is nothing without pressure. Real battle does not wait for calm measured shots. It is chaos, it is death, and you will fail there. He slammed his hand onto the control panel at the wall. Suddenly more drones activated, not 3, not 5, but 10. They burst into the air, glowing red, their movements sharp and chaotic, diving and twisting like a storm of steel wasps. The cadets gasped, some leaning back instinctively. The instructor's eyes narrowed, waiting for the inevitable failure. The human looked up at the storm of drones, his face calm as ever. He bent down, gathering every scrap he could find, his hands quick, precise, shaping arrow after arrow. His bowstring pulled taut, then released. The first drone fell in a burst of sparks. The second followed moments later. The cadets leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts pounding. The drones attacked from every direction, their glowing red lights flashing like predators circling prey, but the human moved faster. His bow sang again and again, arrows flying with deadly precision, each strike perfect, each drone falling one by one, sparks raining down onto the floor. The hall was filled with the sound of breaking machines and the quiet, breathless awe of cadets who could no longer pretend this was luck. When the final drone crashed lifeless to the floor, the silence returned heavier than before. The human lowered the bow slowly, his chest rising and falling with calm breath, his eyes steady, his face unchanged, as if he had done nothing extraordinary. The cadets stared wide-eyed, some with fear, some with respect, but none with mockery any longer. Their whispers were low, heavy, dangerous. He hunted them like animals. He did not miss. He does not need machines. The instructor's hands trembled, though he hid them behind his back. His voice struggled to remain firm enough. You have proven your point. Sit down. But the human did not move immediately. He looked at the rows of alien cadets, his voice calm, steady. Every world has predators, every world has prey, but sometimes the line is not where you think it is. Then he set the bow gently against the desk and returned to his seat. The cadets followed him with their eyes unable to look away. The room was thick with a new truth, a truth they would carry forever. The human was not weak, the human was not prey, the human was something else entirely, and deep inside each of them a new fear had taken root. The instructor clenched his jaw, his heart beating hard. He told himself he was still in control, but he knew the truth too. In the quiet of his mind he could not deny it. This human had shown them something ancient, something terrible, and no matter how he tried to bury it, he felt the same instinct. His cadets felt the instinct that whispered predator. The academy corridors echoed long after the training hall had emptied. The whispers of cadets moved through the stone passages like a hidden current. No one spoke loudly, but every voice carried the same word: human. The human who made a bow, the human who struck down drones with arrows, the human who did not miss. Inside the dormitory the cadets sat in groups, some still shaken, their glowing eyes darting toward the door as if the human might enter at any moment. Some tried to laugh, to dismiss it as luck or trickery, yet their laughter was thin and nervous. It carried no strength. They knew what they had seen and what they had felt: fear. In the center of the academy the instructor stood alone, replaying the footage from earlier, each arrow, each strike, each drone falling with impossible precision. He slowed the image frame by frame, studying the human's posture, his calm eyes, his steady breath. There was no hesitation, no panic. It was as if the human had been hunting his whole life, and the bow was not a crude toy but a natural extension of himself. The instructor clenched his claws against the console. This could not be allowed. He had taught his cadets that humans were fragile, that they were weak prey who survived only by chance. If they now believed otherwise, discipline would fracture, respect would shift, the academy itself could lose control. And yet the memory of that bowstring sound, that sharp hum before each strike, made his chest tighten in a way he hated to admit. The next morning the cadets gathered in the classroom, their movements quieter than usual, no mocking laughter, no casual arrogance. The air was heavy. They sat in stiff silence, waiting. When the human entered, every eye turned. His steps were calm, steady, his face the same as before. No pride, no arrogance, just quiet focus. He sat down in his place and looked ahead as though nothing unusual had happened yesterday. The instructor entered last, his face hard, his eyes sharp, though deep inside his thoughts twisted. He would not let this human unbalance the academy. He would push harder until failure came, because failure had to come. No creature could remain calm under true pressure. He looked over the class, then pointed again at the human. Rise. The human stood without a word, his uniform plain, his expression calm. The instructor's voice rang out: today you will face a true test. No stationary targets, no simple drones. Today we see if your primitive methods survive chaos. He activated the panels along the wall. The floor of the classroom shifted, sliding open to reveal a training chamber beneath, a wide space filled with shifting obstacles, rising walls, moving platforms, and at the far end several armored drones activated, their eyes glowing bright blue, heavier, faster, deadlier than the ones used yesterday. These were combat models designed for war games, not lessons. The cadets hissed in shock, some whispering in disbelief. They had struggled against such drones themselves, even with plasma rifles. No one had ever been asked to face them with a bow. It was madness, it was certain failure, yet their eyes remained fixed on the human, waiting for him to flinch, to hesitate. The human walked forward quietly, his eyes scanning the shifting floor, the drones already moving into formation. His hand lifted the bow with calm precision. He bent to gather scraps again, breaking pieces from the furniture without hesitation, shaping arrows quickly, each one smooth, straight, sharp. He moved as though the chaos around him was irrelevant, as though the rising walls and glowing drones were nothing but trees in a forest. The first drone rushed forward fast and heavy, its armored frame shining under the training lights. The cadets leaned forward waiting to see the human crushed, but the bowstring sang once more. The arrow flew with deadly speed, piercing the drone's eye socket. The machine staggered and fell, sparks bursting from its chest. The cadets gasped. One shouted impossible, another hissed hunter. The second drone moved in zigzag motion, firing stun pulses toward the human, but he was already moving, ducking behind the shifting wall, his body low, his steps light. He drew the bow again, his arrow cutting through the air. It struck the drone mid-flight, shattering its core. The machine dropped lifeless into the pit. The instructor's eyes narrowed, his claws digging into his palm. He had expected hesitation, panic, but instead the human hunted the drones as though they were prey in a forest, every arrow a kill, every movement measured and silent. The third and fourth drones attacked together, flanking from both sides, their weapons glowing. The cadets whispered in fear, surely this was the end. Yet the human rolled to one side, released an arrow that struck the first drone's joint, sending it crashing into the wall, then spun and fired another that pierced the second drone's chest. Both machines collapsed in sparks and smoke, the hall filled with stunned silence. The cadets' hearts pounded, their glowing eyes fixed unblinking. They could no longer tell themselves it was chance, no longer whisper about luck. This was skill, raw and terrifying skill. One cadet muttered low, he is not fighting them, he is hunting them. Another answered, voice shaking, this is what predators do. The instructor roared enough, but even his voice cracked with strain. He triggered the final wave. 5 drones at once, heavy, fast, brutal weapons charged at full power, the floor itself shifting beneath them, platforms rising and falling, the entire chamber alive with chaos. It was more than any cadet had ever faced. It was meant to overwhelm, meant to crush. The human stood calm, the bowstring already pulled back. The first arrow flew slicing through the lead drone's glowing eye. It collapsed. The second arrow followed, striking another in the chest before it could fire. The cadets could not breathe, their glowing eyes locked in terror as the human moved faster than they had ever seen, bending, shaping, releasing arrows without pause, each drone falling one by one until the last crashed lifeless at his feet. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the machines of the chamber seemed to hesitate, the only sound the faint hum of the lights and the quiet breath of the human who stood calm, bow in hand, his eyes steady, his chest rising and falling in slow control. The cadets whispered again, this time not mocking, not fearful, but reverent. Predator, death welder, hunter. The instructor's face was stone, but inside his chest twisted with something darker. He had seen warriors face those drones before. None had stood calm, none had struck so true. This was not weakness disguised, this was not fragile prey pretending, this was something real, something ancient and dangerous. He forced his voice to steady enough. Human, return to your seat, his words harsh though his claws trembled behind his back. The human obeyed without protest, setting the bow gently against the desk before sitting, his face as calm as ever. He looked forward, eyes steady, while the cadets stared, unable to look away. That night the whispers grew louder through the academy, spreading beyond the classroom. Every cadet spoke of the human, every hall echoed with the same word, predator. Some feared it, some admired it, but none could ignore it. The bow had been made from scraps, yet it had torn through machines meant for war, and the calm eyes of the human haunted their thoughts. The instructor sat alone in his chamber, replaying the footage again and again. Each arrow burned into his mind, each strike flawless. He wanted to dismiss it as chance, as luck, but deep down he knew the truth. He had seen many warriors, but none who moved like this, none who hunted like this, and the thought gnawed at him. What would happen if such a being was given real weapons? What would happen if humanity was unleashed on the galaxy? He turned off the screen, his claws tight against the desk, his chest heavy, the whispers of predator still echoing in his mind. He hated the word, but he could not silence it because he felt it too deep in his bones. Humans were not prey, and that truth terrified him. The academy training hall was darker than usual, the lights dimmed to a low glow, the air heavy with tension. Every cadet sat in silence, their glowing eyes fixed forward. None dared to whisper, none dared to laugh. The memory of the humans' bow haunted them like a shadow. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw the drones falling one by one to crude arrows they had mocked only days before. The instructor entered the hall, his steps sharp, his face carved from stone, his eyes narrow. He did not look at his cadets, he looked only at the human, the small figure sitting calm among towering aliens. The human's face betrayed nothing, no pride, no arrogance, only that same calm that infuriated the instructor more than mockery ever could. Stand, human, his voice rang out like a blade cutting through the silence. The human stood without question, his uniform plain, his hands at his sides, eyes steady. The instructor paced slowly around him, claws tapping against the floor as he spoke. Yesterday you faced drones built for training, today you will face a real challenge, one you cannot trick with your primitive sticks. He slammed his claw onto the control panel and the walls of the hall shifted, sliding apart, metal doors opening with a grinding roar. Heavy shapes stepped forward, combat drones, not training models, not practice toys. These were war machines, taller than the cadets, plated in black armor, their glowing red eyes burning with malice, each armed with plasma cannons, their movements heavy and deliberate. They were not meant for students, they were meant for soldiers. Gasps filled the room, some cadets even rose from their seats, their bodies stiff with disbelief. Instructor, this is not allowed, one called, voice shaking. These are not tests, they are execution. Another whispered, he cannot survive this even with a rifle, but the instructor silenced them with a glare, his voice cold sharp. This is no longer about survival, this is about truth. Let us see if the human is predator or only prey. The human looked at the machines, his calm eyes scanning their frames, their weapons, their stance. Then he walked forward slowly without hesitation. He picked up the bow he had left against the desk days before. His fingers touched the worn wood as though it were alive. He bent down to collect shards of metal, scraps of broken panels. The cadets watched in silence as his hands worked fast, smooth, deliberate, shaping arrows with impossible calm. The first war drone stepped forward, its cannon glowing with energy. The instructor's claws flexed behind his back, his chest tight. He wanted the human to fall, wanted his cadets to see failure, yet deep inside a darker voice whispered fear. What if he does not fail? The human drew the bowstring back, his arm steady. The drone raised its weapon, but the arrow flew first. It cut the air so fast the cadets could not track it until it struck the glowing eye of the machine. The war drone staggered, its cannon firing wild into the wall before it collapsed in sparks. The cadets gasped, the sound sharp, echoing around the chamber, their glowing eyes wide. One whispered low, impossible. Another hissed, death welder. The instructor snarled, coincidence. He snapped his claws at the remaining drones, kill him. The machines moved forward, their cannons glowing. Plasma light filled the hall. The cadets flinched as bolts tore through the air, but the human was already moving, his body low, fast, smooth like water. He rolled behind a rising wall, drew another arrow, and fired. The shaft struck a drone's joint, collapsing it to the ground before a second arrow pierced its chest. The hall filled with smoke, sparks, and fire. The cadets clutched their seats, unable to look away. Their instinct screamed prey, but not toward the human. No, their fear shifted, their fear aimed at him. The instructor slammed the console, unleashing the remaining drones. They came all at once, firing plasma into the walls, into the floor. The human moved like a shadow, each arrow finding its mark, each drone falling in bursts of fire and metal until the chamber was littered with smoking machines, and the only one left standing was the human, his bow in hand, his chest rising slowly, his calm face unchanged. The silence that followed was crushing. Even the hum of the lights seemed loud. The cadets could not speak, their throats tight, their eyes locked on the human who stood among the wreckage like a hunter among bones. One cadet finally whispered so low it was almost a prayer, he does not fight them, he kills them like animals. The instructor's claws dug into the console, his rage boiling, his fear louder than his anger. He had wanted humiliation, he had wanted failure. Instead he had created something worse. He had shown his cadets the truth of humans, he had shown them a predator among them, and now they could never unsee it. He forced his voice sharp, though it trembled inside. Enough, you have proven nothing. Primitive tricks cannot match real weapons. You only got lucky. Again his words sounded hollow even to himself. The cadets did not move, their glowing eyes still locked on the human. None of them believed his words anymore. They had seen too much. The human walked slowly back to his desk. He set the bow gently against the wood and sat, his calm eyes staring forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The cadets shifted, their bodies stiff, their minds racing. The words spread again, whispered from one mouth to another, predator, predator, predator. That night the academy was restless. Cadets whispered in every corner, some with or some with fear, some with both. They replayed the image in their minds, the human standing calm while war machines fell at his feet, the sound of the bowstring still echoing in their ears. The instructor sat alone in his quarters, his claws pressed against his skull, his mind replaying the same image again and again. Every time he closed his eyes he saw arrows cutting through machines stronger than any cadet had ever faced, and he felt it deep inside. No matter how he tried to bury it, no matter how he tried to deny it, the truth was their humans were not prey, they were predators, and predators never stop hunting. The hall was filled with smoke and the smell of burnt metal. The wreckage of war drones still sparked on the floor, but no one moved, no one spoke. Every cadet sat frozen, their glowing eyes fixed on the human who had just walked back to his seat, his steps calm, his face unreadable. He sat down as if the destruction around him was nothing more than a simple lesson. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. It pressed against the walls, against the cadets' chests, until one of them could no longer contain it. His voice came out in a low whisper, predator. Another hissed softly in agreement, predator. The words spread like fire across the room until every cadet's mouth formed it, even those who had mocked the human most loudly only days before. The instructor stood at the front of the hall, his grey skin pale, his ridged face tight, his claws trembling behind his back. He had wanted to break the human, to humiliate him, to remind everyone that Earth was weak, but instead he had created a nightmare. He had watched a bow of scraps tear through war machines that even trained soldiers struggled against, and now his cadets no longer looked at him with respect, they looked only at the human with wide, fearful eyes. Enough, the instructor barked, his voice sharp though it cracked with strain. This proves nothing. He is still fragile, weak flesh. This was only chance and instinct, nothing more. But his words fell flat. The cadets did not turn their eyes away from the human. Their instincts screamed at them to listen to what their eyes had seen, not to what their instructor told them. The bow still rested against the desk, simple, crude, silent, and yet it carried more weight than any plasma rifle they had ever trained with. The instructor slammed his claws against the console, the noise loud in the quiet chamber. Return to your dorms now, his voice thundered, but even then the cadets left in silence, their eyes never leaving the human until they were forced through the doors. The human remained seated until the last one was gone, then he stood, lifted the bow, and carried it quietly back to his quarters. He did not smile, he did not boast, his steps were slow, steady, like a hunter who has finished a day's work and is already preparing for the next hunt. That night the academy did not sleep. Whispers filled every corridor, every chamber, every dorm. Predator. Some cadets feared the human, now afraid to sit near him. Others spoke of him with or as if he were a living legend, but none could ignore him, none could dismiss him anymore. He had changed something inside them all. The instructor sat alone in his private quarters, his claws pressed against the desk, his eyes burning with frustration. He replayed the recordings again, each arrow, each drone falling one by one, every strike precise, calm, deadly. The more he watched, the tighter his chest became, until finally he turned away, shutting the console with a snarl. He could not watch anymore, because each time he did the truth grew louder in his mind. Humans were not prey. But he could not allow this truth to spread. If his cadets believed it fully, they would lose the arrogance that had been drilled into them since birth, and arrogance was the core of their strength. Without it, they were nothing. He had to find a way to silence the human, to crush him in front of everyone, to prove once and for all that Earth was still weak. The next day when the cadets gathered, the classroom was silent again, their glowing eyes darting toward the human. As he entered, he walked to his desk and sat calmly as always, the bow resting beside him, his face still unreadable. The instructor entered moments later, his voice hard. "Today there will be no demonstrations," he said sharply. "Today there will be no weapons. Today we speak of history and theory." Some cadets shifted in confusion, but they obeyed. The instructor spoke long and loud about the victories of their people, about the power of their weapons, about the weakness of worlds like Earth. His words were sharp and proud, yet the cadets listened without focus. Their eyes drifted toward the human again and again, their thoughts filled with the sound of bowstrings, not plasma cannons. The instructor saw their distraction, and it burned inside him. He tried to speak louder, sharper, but the harder he tried, the more obvious it became. They were no longer listening to him, not fully. Their instincts had shifted, their respect was no longer his alone. Finally one cadet raised a hand, his glowing eyes flicking toward the human before meeting the instructor's gaze. "Instructor, if the human can kill war drones with scraps, what could humans do with real weapons?" The room fell silent. Every cadet leaned forward, the question heavy, sharp. The instructor froze, his chest tight. He wanted to roar, to crush the question, but the silence was louder than his rage. Every cadet was waiting for an answer. The instructor's voice cracked low. "They would fail," he forced out. "They would fail because they are weak flesh, they are fragile." But even as he said it, his eyes betrayed him. They flicked toward the human sitting calm with the bow beside him, and the cadets saw it. They saw the crack in his voice, the hesitation in his eyes, and in that moment they knew his words were hollow. The silence grew unbearable until finally the human himself spoke, his voice quiet, calm, cutting through the air like a blade. "Every world has predators, every world has prey, but you should never mistake the quiet of the hunter for weakness." The cadets shivered, their glowing eyes wide, their instincts screaming louder now than ever before. The instructor slammed his claws against the desk. "Enough," he barked. "Sit down, human, silence your tongue." But the human only leaned back in his chair, his face calm, his eyes steady. He said no more, yet the silence he left behind was heavier than any speech. The cadets left the classroom later that day, whispering louder now, the word predator filling the air like a chant. It echoed through the corridors, through the dorms, until it reached even the cadets who had not witnessed the battle themselves. Soon the entire academy was speaking it. The human was predator, and predators could not be ignored. The instructor sat alone that night, his mind racing, his claws digging into his own skin. He had tried to humiliate the human, he had tried to crush him, yet each time he only made him stronger. He replayed the bowstring sound in his head, the arrows striking true, the cadets' whispers growing louder, predator, 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 until it drowned out even his own thoughts. For the first time in his long career, the instructor felt something he could not control. He felt fear, not for himself, but for what this truth meant. If one human with scraps could shake an academy, then what could 1,000 humans with real weapons do? What could an army of predators unleash upon the galaxy? The thought lingered heavy in his chest, and no matter how he tried, he could not push it away. The night was long inside the academy. The halls were quiet, but not peaceful. Shadows stretched across the walls, while the hum of hidden machines filled the silence. Most cadets lay in their dorms awake, their glowing eyes open, staring into the dark. None of them could sleep. They could still see the human standing calm while war drones fell around him. They could still hear the sharp sound of the bowstring cutting through the air. They could still feel the word whispering inside their bones, predator. The instructor sat alone in his chamber, hunched over the console, the room lit only by the glow of the recordings. He had watched the battle again and again, arrows flying, machines falling, the human's eyes calm, steady. Each time he tried to convince himself it was luck, it had to be luck, but the truth bled through with every frame. He slowed the video frame by frame, looking for hesitation, weakness, fear, but there was none. The human never flinched, never panicked, not once. His claws tapped against the desk, his chest heavy. He remembered training young warriors long ago, teaching them discipline, teaching them control, but he had never seen a cadet with this kind of calm, this kind of focus. The human had something else, something ancient, something dangerous. He turned off the recording and sat back, his eyes staring into the dark, his mind racing. What if humans were not prey? What if everything he had been taught, everything he had taught his cadets was wrong? His claws tightened around the edge of the desk until the metal bent. If this truth spread, it would change everything his people believed about themselves, about humans, about the galaxy. He tried to bury the thought. He tried to tell himself it was only one human, one strange anomaly, but deep inside he knew it was not chance. He had seen the way the cadets looked at him. He had seen the fear in their glowing eyes, not toward the drones, not toward the lesson, but toward the human himself. The instructor rose from his seat and paced the chamber, his claws clicking against the floor. He told himself he needed to stop this before it went further. The human must fail, he must break, he must be shown as weak before the academy lost control, before the cadets lost respect for their own kind. But how do you break something that does not fear? Meanwhile, the human sat alone in his quarters, his bow resting beside him, his hands still. He stared at the weapon of scraps as if it held memories only he could see. His mind was far from the academy, far from the whispers of predator. He thought instead of earth of forests filled with shadows of hunts that stretched long into the night, of ancestors who had survived by listening to every rustle, every breath, every sign of prey and predator. He thought of lessons carried through blood and bone, the truth that survival was not given, it was taken. He did not smile, he did not boast, he sat in silence, because silence was the nature of hunters. Silence was how you learned, how you survived. Across the dorms the cadets whispered again, one voice low, filled with, or if he can do that with wood and wire, what could he do with steel? Another hissed, if humans fight with weapons like ours, no one could stop them. A third voice whispered, what if their whole species is like him? The whispers spread, filling the dorms, filling the halls. Even those who had not seen the battles with their own eyes felt the weight of the words predator. The academy was changing, not with weapons or battles, but with fear and respect, shifting the balance of power with every whisper. The instructor heard the whispers too, he felt them pressing against him. Wherever he walked, cadets no longer looked at him with the same blind obedience. Their eyes flicked toward the human even when he was not present. Their discipline had cracked, and the crack widened each day. He decided he would act, he would prove once and for all that humans were weak. He would make the human face something no creature could survive, and he would do it publicly so that all cadets would see the failure with their own eyes. He would cut out the whispers at their root. The next morning the cadets filed into the training hall, their steps uneasy, their voices low. They knew something was coming. The air was heavy, the walls hummed louder than usual. When the instructor entered, his face hard, his claws sharp against the console, he did not speak at first. He let the silence stretch until every cadet sat still waiting. Finally he spoke, his voice deep, sharp. Today will be the final test. Today the truth will be revealed. The cadets shifted, their glowing eyes flicking toward the human who sat calm as always, his bow resting beside him. The instructor's eyes narrowed at the sight of that simple weapon. His claws slammed the console. The floor of the hall shifted, opening wide panels that groaned with weight, and from below heavy shapes rose massive machines, not drones, not training units, but war beasts, mechanical constructs used only in military campaigns, each one towering twice the height of a cadet, covered in black armor glowing with red lines. They were built to destroy entire squads, not single soldiers. Gasps filled the hall. Cadets gripped their seats, their bodies tense. Some whispered in fear, this is madness, this is not training, this is execution. The instructor raised a claw, silencing them, his eyes locked on the human. Prove yourself now, human, or be destroyed. The human stood slowly, calm, steady. He lifted the bow and bent to gather what little scraps he could find, shaping arrows with quick, precise motions. The beasts roared their engines, screaming, their heavy steps shaking the ground. The cadets leaned forward, unable to look away, their hearts pounding, their instincts screaming. The human drew the bowstring back, his arm steady, his eyes calm. The first arrow flew fast, cutting through the air, striking the glowing core of the nearest beast. Sparks exploded, but the machine did not fall. It staggered, then roared louder, charging forward, plasma fire burning through the floor. The cadets gasped, certain this was the end. But the human moved like a shadow, rolling aside, climbing a rising wall. His bowstring sang again and again. Arrows flew, each one striking joints, gaps, weak points. The beast staggered, one collapsed, another fell crashing into the floor, sparks lighting the hall, but more kept coming, heavy, powerful, relentless. The cadets were on their feet now, their glowing eyes wide, their voices whispering, predator, predator, predator. Each arrow, each movement burned into their memory. The human hunted even as death closed in around him. The instructor stood at the console, his claws tight, his chest heavy. He wanted to see the human fail, but as each beast fell his fear grew stronger. What if he does not fail? What if he cannot be stopped? The human stood atop the wreckage, his bow in hand, his chest rising and falling slowly, his eyes steady, calm among the ruins. The beasts lay broken, the hall filled with smoke and fire. The cadets silent, their glowing eyes wide with awe and terror. One cadet whispered finally, his voice trembling, if this is what one human can do with scraps, what will an army of them bring? The silence that followed was heavier than any machine, heavier than any weapon. Every cadet knew the answer, though none dared to speak it aloud. The instructor's claws shook, his face pale, his mind burning with the same thought he had tried to bury again and again. If humans were predators, then the galaxy had no defense against them, and for the first time in his long career he felt small, weak, fragile prey. Smoke still curled through the broken training hall, the stench of burned circuits and shattered metal hung heavy in the air. Sparks rained down from torn cables, flickering across the floor like dying stars. Cadets stood frozen, their glowing eyes wide, unblinking. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe. Their minds replayed the scene over and over, the human standing calm on the wreckage, his bow drawn, his eyes sharp like a predator watching prey. The silence stretched long, heavy, crushing, until the human finally lowered his bow slowly, as if the battle had never touched him. His movements calm, controlled, his face unreadable. He stepped down from the twisted body of the war beast, the sound of his boots soft against the cracked floor. Each step echoed like thunder in the ears of the cadets. The instructor stood at the console, his claws tight against the metal, his chest rising and falling in short, heavy bursts, his eyes locked on the human. Every part of his body screamed to deny what he had seen, but there was no denial, no excuse, no trick. The human had faced beasts that entire squads feared, and he had stood alone and won. The cadets could not stay silent. Whispers rose, trembling at first, then growing louder. Predator, predator, predator. The word echoed like a drumbeat, filling the hall, pressing against the walls until the sound seemed to vibrate in the air. Some cadets spoke with or others with fear, but the word was the same, always predator. The instructor slammed his claws against the console, the sound sharp, loud, silencing the whispers enough. He roared, his voice shaking with more than anger, more than authority. It shook with fear. The cadets froze, but their glowing eyes still turned to the human, their bodies trembling with a new truth. The instructor's claws dug into the console, his mind racing faster than his words. He could feel control slipping like sand through his hands. If the cadets no longer feared him, if they no longer trusted him, if they looked to the human instead, then the academy itself would fall apart. Discipline would die, respect would die. He could not allow it. He pointed one shaking claw toward the human. You are no cadet, he spat. You are a danger to this academy, a danger to this world. You are not welcome here. Gasps broke across the hall. Cadets whispered again, some with disbelief, some with anger, others with fear, but no one moved. The human did not flinch, he did not speak, he simply stood tall, bow still in hand, his calm gaze locked on the instructor. The silence pressed heavier until finally the human's voice cut through, low, steady, simple. I did only what you asked, nothing more. The words struck harder than any weapon because they were true. The instructor demanded a weapon test. The human built one. The instructor unleashed machines. The human survived, nothing more, nothing less. The cadets shifted uneasily, their glowing eyes moving between the human and the instructor. Some began to doubt their teacher, some began to wonder if their trust had been misplaced. The instructor saw it, he felt it burning into him. He knew the cadets were slipping from his control, and that thought filled him with rage. He raised his claw again, his voice sharp. No more tests, no more whispers, this ends now. But the sound of his command felt weak, hollow compared to the silence of the human standing calm among wreckage. The human turned without a word and walked toward the exit, his bow slung across his shoulder. The cadets parted instinctively, stepping aside, their glowing eyes following him. Some lowered their heads in respect, others pulled back in fear, but none dared to block his path, none dared to stop him. The heavy doors closed behind him, the echo thundered across the hall, and in that echo the cadets whispered again, predator. That night the academy was restless. Cadets lay awake, whispering in the dark, their voices carrying from room to room. Some feared what they had seen, others admired it, but all of them knew nothing would be the same again. If one human could face such beasts and win, what else could their kind do? If one hunter could stand alone, what would happen if many stood together? In his private chamber the instructor paced, claws scraping across the floor, his mind unraveling his every lesson, every law, every truth, now fragile, cracking under the weight of one human. He had thought he would humiliate him, instead the human humiliated him in front of every cadet. Worse than humiliation, it was exposure. The cadets now knew there was something greater, something their instructor could not control. He stopped at the console, his claws shaking as he activated the comm system, his voice low, sharp, connect me to command. Hours passed. The human sat alone in his quarters, his bow laid across his lap. He sharpened the edges of his makeshift arrows, the sound quiet, steady like a heartbeat, his face unreadable, but his mind alert. He knew the instructor would not rest, he knew this was not over. Footsteps echoed in the halls outside, multiple heavy steps, synchronized, disciplined, the sound of armed soldiers moving through the academy. The human's hand stilled on the arrow, his head tilting slightly, listening, counting, measuring. He stood slowly, bow in hand, arrows gathered, his eyes calm, steady. The door hissed open, bright light cutting into the room, shadows shifting across the walls. Armed guards filled the doorway, their armor gleaming, their weapons charged, their glowing eyes locked on him. The lead guard's voice cold, human, you are ordered to surrender, you are under arrest by command authority. The human did not move, did not speak, his gaze steady, his breathing slow, silence stretched heavy, pressing into the guards. One of them shifted uneasily, his grip on the weapon tightening. Another flicked his eyes toward the bow, then back at the human, fear flickering in his face. Finally the human spoke, calm, quiet. Why? The guard hesitated, his voice faltering before he answered, you are considered a threat to academy, order you will comply or force will be used. The human studied them, his eyes cold, sharp, predator eyes. The guards tensed, weapons rising, fingers tight against triggers, the air heavy with the promise of violence. Then the human did something none of them expected. He lowered his bow, he placed it on the table slowly, his hands open, empty. He stood still, calm, steady. I will not fight unless you make me. The guards froze, uncertain, the silence pressed against them harder than any weapon. The lead guard swallowed, his throat dry. Secure him, he ordered, his voice trembling. They stepped forward, shackles in hand. The human did not resist, he allowed them to bind his wrists, his calm gaze never breaking. The guards felt his eyes like weight pressing into them, even with chains, even unarmed. He did not look weak, he did not look broken, he looked like a hunter waiting for the right moment. They led him through the halls, cadets spilling from their dorms, watching in silence, their glowing eyes wide. Whispers spread quickly, predator, predator, predator. They saw the chains, but they also saw the calm, they saw the strength that did not bend even under arrest, and their whispers grew louder, heavier, filling the academy like a storm. The instructor watched from the shadows, his claws tight, his chest heavy. He had thought chains would break the human, he had thought arrest would end the whispers, but as the cadets watched in awe, he realized too late the chains had only made the whispers stronger. The human was taken to a holding cell deep beneath the academy, the door sealed thick, the lights dim. He sat on the floor, chains clinking softly. As he moved his hands, he rested his back against the wall, his eyes closed, calm, steady, waiting. Above the academy, the instructor stood alone in his chamber, staring at the reports from command. They had agreed with his request. The human would be transferred off-world, judged by higher councils, but even as he read the words, his claws shook. He felt no victory, only dread, because he knew the whispers would not stop. The cadets had already seen too much, and worse, he feared that beyond the academy, beyond this world, others might soon learn the truth. In the dark cell, the human opened his eyes, sharp, steady, his lips whispering words only he could hear. The hunt never ends.